Conquer the Noise is a podcast produced by Unconquered, an independent agency challenging brand perspective through redefined content. This podcast is dedicated to telling stories of outstanding ideas and people who have found their way amongst the chatter. I'm Jonathan Hansen, Chief Creative Officer at Unconquered, and I'm your host of Cultivating Purpose and Passion in Business. Today we're speaking with Karen Schnelwar, VP of Global Marketing at OXO. All right, Karen, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure being here with you.
So you've been at OXO for 3 years. The company's been around almost 30 years. I find the origin story fascinating and also really sweet. So why don't you give me a little bit of information about how the company got started and how empathy has really been baked into this company culture?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined OXO in early 2017 and always loved the brand from afar. And as a brand strategist, always admired it greatly. But until you're inside the brand, it's just impossible to know exactly how wonderful it is. Starting with the origin story, which is laced with empathy, which is part of our everyday so subconsciously and overtly when it comes to our communications. So in 1990, Sam Farber and Betsy Farber were making dinner. I believe Betsy was peeling apples for an apple tart. She was an architect. She is an architect. Sam Farber was a housewares person who had retired. So they were just having dinner. And Sam Farber observed his wife peeling apples with, like a metal peeler, the kind of no brand metal peeler that's everywhere in the world. And she struggled with it. She had mild arthritis and he just watched her and they said together, what is this? There's got to be a better way. So it's kind of that moment of realization, and that ethos of finding a better way it was the founding moment of inspiration for OXO. So together they took modeling clay and they enhanced the handle so it had a more ergonomic feel. And the first OXO product was born, at least in its very, very early prototype form. The first OXO peeler, our very first product, launched in 1990. I think it came with about 15 products, I believe, 12 or 15 products in the original roster. It launched with OXO Good Grips. And I always think it's funny, and I love when people say, gosh, I love your products. They're so beautiful. I agree that they're beautiful. But I think when OXO first launched, I suspect it looked like it landed from Mars because it looked like nothing else out there. And that chunky handle that makes it so pleasant to hold and so much easier to use. We say that we are for all hands of all levels of ability, hands of all sizes. And it really is welcome there. So we say that OXO was born of love, that its founding story is actually a love story. In our brand film, there's a line that I really love. It says, the first OXO peeler was designed for a pair of hands that someone loved more than their own. So there's a lot of beauty, grace, and love woven in there. The other interesting thing about OXO's founding, which is probably what propelled it to become, a Harvard Business School case study, it's just a really kind of paradigm shifting brand, is that if you think of a bell curve of the population, most brands design for the top of that bell curve. I mean, why wouldn't you? That's the bulk of the population. You want to sell as much product, reach as many people as possible. Makes perfect sense. OXO actually broke that curve and designed for the front of the curve, the part of the population that needed a bit more help. So like that moment of inspiration with the apple peeling, watching someone struggle. And what OXO realized is if you can sell for people who need more help, you not only invite those people into the fold, you not only help them with access and ability, but in doing so, you're creating a product. You could create a product, as we did, that made everything better for the bulk of the population as well. So you can't fault a brand for looking at the top of the curve, but OXO was quite revolutionary 30 years ago for looking at the front of the curve, because not only did they include more people, they also made it better for the general population as well by taking inspiration from those who needed a lot more help. So there's a lot of grace, a lot of empathy, and a lot of kindness. That's really at the core of what OXO is all about.
When I see OXO, the logo, I always think of hugs and kisses, like when you sign letters, XOXO. So I think that definitely fits in line with that.
I love that.
I have distinct memories of working I've always loved spending time in the kitchen, and it's like a big family activity for us. And when I was younger, like a lot younger, I remember standing in the kitchen peeling potatoes for Sunday dinner with my mom and using those terrible metal peelers and cutting my fingers, sliding out of my hands. And then I actually remember when she bought the OXO, ergonomic handle, or the peeler, and what a difference
for you.
Oh, it was a game changer. And now I think we have everything with that design, with that handle and the design,
That's
from
so
like
nice.
pizza, from like pizza cutters to everything that we can sort of find. I just love the feel of it.
That's fantastic. Well, we make about 2,000 products, so there's a lot to discover. I feel like even the people who love OXO the most can't possibly know every single thing we make. So we're always keen to help people explore further, because what they find can really make their everyday life better. It's funny when you talk about the hugs and kisses. The OXO name was chosen because it is a palindrome and an ambiogram. So it was another nod to accessibility. You can read it backwards, you can read it forwards, you can read it upside down. It still reads OXO.
So I feel like you have a pretty big challenge ahead of you when you think about the sort of like the love story, the empathy, all of the emotion that goes into creating the product, or the why of creating the product, and how do you translate that now into like marketing messages? How does the potential customers and current customers like feel, or introduce themselves to that brand story?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a lot of love behind the scenes, but when we define our brand attributes, we have is and isn't. So we say we are lovable, but we're not sappy or nostalgic about it. So we try to show the love by creating products that will make people's lives easier, that will inspire love from them. We pour a lot of heart into it, but our communications are they're pretty straightforward. We tonally want to make them accessible and inviting and welcoming. We have a really friendly tone. We have a bit of wit, a bit of a wink sometimes, but really we're very straightforward. We want our communications from our brand to be as accessible and as pleasant and inviting and satisfying and delightful as the products are. So we communicate across, my gosh, over a dozen channels on any given day. Part of what my team did, starting 3.5 years ago, is define the brand, and I'm happy to talk more about that brand definition and what we stand for. And then once that solid foundation was laid strategically, really take a look at our brand identity, not wanting to abandon any rich equity. As a matter of fact, we wanted to celebrate it. We love our logo. We actually had it typographically perfected and redrawn in a way that the average eye wouldn't notice, but we wanted to make it even more typographically correct and even more telegraphic. We're taking a look at our packaging system that's already started to roll out in the market. Again, cherishing and simplifying and modernizing the equity that's been working the hardest for us. And then it translates to our everyday communication. So when we introduce a product, we want to have it say hello to the world, but very quickly get to work in explaining what it's there for. There's so many great features and benefits of our products. If there's one most important word for the brand that drives us, and one thing that we try to communicate outwardly but humbly, is better. Our brand essence is we make every day better every day. So we focus on the realm of the everyday. We're not putting people into outer space orbit. Like we're not building literal bridges. We are actually focused on everyday tasks and chores and tools that help you do them better. And we're proud to live in that space, and we're proud to play kind of a humble role. Jonathan, when you were talking about how many OXO tools you have, I found, and this is highly unscientific, that the average person who thinks they have X number of tools actually has twice as many, because there's a lot of like humble, hardworking heroes in your drawer that, like, we don't want to scream OXO every time someone opens up their drawer. If they love us but then don't like thank us every time they use it, that's okay, as long as we're there working hard. And so we try to get that spirit across in our communications. We are also trying to be innovative and and delightful in how we come to life, like experimenting with, how do we take product videos and make them interesting and make them the kind of thing that like work hard at point of sale to help people understand the features and benefits of the product, but do it in a way that isn't a tedious thing to watch. Like, how do we keep it lighthearted? How do we make it just a series of delightful seconds that add up to a cohesive story? When do GIFs, when do they come into play? Is that a lesser than video asset, or is it actually more because it's a quicker get with a bit of charm to it? And so we weigh and measure each of our channels. We may weigh and measure each of our assets, be the motion assets, static assets, verbal assets, and we try to plot a consumer journey, which is certainly dynamic and ever changing, but we try to plot a consumer journey that will help people discover us and learn more about us at their own pace, at their own will, and hopefully welcome us into their lives in like a deeper way, with every passing day.
Yeah, that the customer journey is really interesting because now that COVID is a big part of our lives, we're seeing that customer journey is changing. I'm curious to how what you're seeing at OXO as far as the customer journey is concerned and how you're pivoting.
Yeah, well, it's very digital these days. Stores are open selectively, depending on the market, depending on which specific channels. We're in grocery stores, and those have remained open consistently. The Bed Baths and Targets of the world, they're there for people too. But certainly everyone, this is like, again, it's partially anecdotal, is just everyone turned digital very, very quickly. So it's kind of like, I feel like the word of the first few months of the pandemic is pivot. And I think, a lot of businesses pivoted, a lot of brands pivoted, and consumers certainly pivoted, especially during lockdown. They turned within because they couldn't go out. That might mean turning into their drawers and their pantries and organizing things and figuring out how much they had and how much they needed, but certainly pivoting to how they shop. And, online sales across all industries have been growing, but it's still a fraction of brick and mortar. And for those first few months, and who knows what the future holds as far as like second waves or future lockdowns, hopefully none of that will come to fruition, but that certainly sounds like it's on the horizon. And so all of these digital habits that we've learned are going to come in handy again and again. It's an interesting conversation. What is going to stay as is once there's a vaccine, once we can go back to a new normal, and then what's going to stay the same. And I feel like a lot of digital habits are going to absolutely stay. Everything from more flexible work schedules and work locations to how people order everyday products. And, ours are probably a big part of that. One thing that we're known for, that's a question that I don't have an answer to, but I think it's interesting to kind of talk about quite a bit. When you go to a store and there we are, the tool and gadget wall, whether you came to a Bed Bath or a Target for us, or whether you were going to buy sheets and then you passed us along the way, whether you came for one product from us and found 4 others, or whether you were shopping in a completely different category but kind of couldn't help yourself. It's always struck me, the OXO tool and gadget wall as like a grown-up kid in a candy store moment, where it's just like, oh my gosh, they make that. That's so great. I never thought of that before. And so I think that one thing that I think a lot about, and I don't think there's a silver bullet solution, but it's an ongoing conversation, is, if brick and mortar isn't going to be something everyone can do every day, what are ways to translate that sense of discovery, that sense of wonder, that way to help navigate our portfolio digitally in a way that's as compelling as that brick and mortar experience, where it almost like literally overwhelms your peripheral vision, depending on the store you go into. It's like right in front of you, front and center. So these are interesting things that we're giving a lot of thought to. But we're grateful for all of our retail partners and all the various ways people have been able to find us. It's feels really fortunate to be in an industry that's able to help people right now and feel better about cooking at home and cleaning at home and parenting at home and tending bar at home. We make lots of products in lots of categories, and it's things people are looking to use right now. So I feel really lucky to be part of that.
Yeah, I always feel like a real adult when I go to the store and I get excited for kitchen utensils. Those are the moments I'm like, man, I must be getting old if this is my excitement.
No, you are. It's like that scene in the movie Old School where he's like, I don't know. Like I got a big day. We're going to go to Bed Bath.
Exactly.
Happens to be us.
Yeah, it does. But it's always so gratifying then when you get home and you use it and it works and it's great, and then you integrate it into your workflow. Like I never thought a garlic press would be so awesome, but it's like it comes out every meal.
I love that. And it's always interesting to hear people's, favorites or ones that they've had kind of heroic moments with. It usually happens like at the dentist when the hygienist like has their hands in your mouth and they're like, oh, so what do you do? And then you say who you work for. And then the rest of the time, and I love this in a good way, is spent hearing their favorite OXO products. It's definitely passes the time, especially during a doctor's appointment. But sometimes it's like the obvious showstoppers, the salad spinner, which is one of our icons. The peeler is always like a favorite. And then sometimes, like I love that you said the garlic press. Like I ordered oysters the other night just to kind of like go totally crazy. And it came with a shucking knife from the oyster farm, but then I had the OXO oyster knife. And like, it was amazing. I mean, it's really hard to shuck oysters, I learned. But
it is.
Like,
and I'm always worried I'm going to lose a thumb or go right through my hand.
A wonder that I wasn't carted off to the emergency room completely failed. But that OXO tool in the moment, man, I just kept thinking about torque. Like that ergonomic handle took on a whole new meaning because you really got to put some muscle into it. And that's just what the stock shucker was missing, was that heft, so you could really get that extra leverage. But sometimes it's just like the humble spatula, when you're making something simple. We have an omelet turner, and I discovered this early in lockdown where I got in this like serious omelet kick. And there's something about this omelet turner, which I'd never given thought to in my life, which I'd been handed because they had extras in the office. I was like, God, this thing's amazing. Like you can't not make a perfect omelet with it. Like everyone who loves omelets should get one because it will up your omelet game tremendously. And, these days we're not out of the COVID woods, like small things like that make a really big difference.
It does. And I think, like, to your point about spatulas, to totally geek out on kitchen utensils, I think like spatulas are wonderful because they reduce waste. I was, if you're a baker or you're working where you're transferring a lot of like liquids from one container to another, the amount of I guess food that's still in the bowl that you can get out is pretty significant. And I didn't really realize that until I don't know, the last few years until I started actually using one.
I think that's very insightful and something that should be pointed out more. When I think of our tools and gadgets, some things are made for single ingredients, some things are made for a family of ingredients like citrus. And it struck me, just kind of thinking of it from an insight perspective behind the scenes, it's like, do you need X product that's just for citrus? Like, could you just do it with a knife? Maybe, but like this is designed to get the most out of every product. I should say to make the most out of every ingredient. Like if you have this manual juicer of ours, like it will get every drop, and then you could measure every drop, and you can, you can get the right pulp that you want. You can get rid of the pits just the right way. Like the whole experience is such a pleasant thing and such a thoughtful thing, oftentimes in unexpected ways, but also like you're getting everything out of that ingredient. And these days, probably more than ever, that's extremely important from a consciousness level of wanting to reduce food waste, but also just making food go further, because trips to the market these days are not as much of a no-brainer as they were in the past.
It's true. And food waste is one of my big pet peeves. I hate food waste. It just feels like such a waste of resources. And when I say resources, I don't mean just like the food that you're eating, but what it took to grow it and what it took to get to you. And then you also think of, or at least in New York City, I see food lines everywhere now. At churches, I have a lot of churches in my neighborhood. We were talking about the Upper West Side earlier. I see food lines. And, I feel fortunate enough to be able to have access and to have not to have to worry about where my food's coming from and when I'm going to get it. So seeing those things and making the most out of it is definitely like super important for me personally.
Absolutely. There's more in a way, there's more respect for resources than ever, not just for people who are sadly faced with food scarcity issues, but for people who are blessed with plenty. Like I think there's a lot more people not taking things for granted anymore and living more consciously and more purposefully.
So when you are are marketing a new product, or or products that have been in the portfolio for a long time, and you're doing campaigns. I'm really curious how how you're working with. I guess I don't want to, maybe the word metrics, and I don't mean metrics as in necessarily like hardcore data, but I think one of the from the agency side, you've been on the agency side.
Yeah, 20 years
A big,
process.
a big question is always like, what am I going to see in my return? So how are you measuring some of these? Because the products that you make are definitely on or rooted inside the emotional side of things. So sometimes you're making those emotional connections with people, but I may not go out and buy something right away. So how are you, leveraging that and keeping that in perspective?
It's an excellent question, and it's not a simple answer. I will definitely try to do my best. I mean, we are on the marketing side and the brand side of OXO. We try to harness the spirit of like constant searching, constant research that's done with users to make the products better. We want to make our communication vehicles better. We want to optimize our communication channels. We want to make sure we're reaching the right people with the right messages, etc. My background is in brand strategy. I lead the entire marketing team and graphic design team, and brand experience and photography and PR. Like it's seen holistically, but like my background is brand strategy, and that is arguably one of the biggest drivers of brand value, but one of the most difficult things to value. Because as a strategist, and I consulted, with agencies and with brands across categories, like lots of different kinds over the years, it's like if you do your job half right, that brand strategy deliverable should not be revisited for many years, at least 5 years, maybe 10 or 20 years. And even then it's like a touch up, because if you do it right, you're like uncovering a truth that is like the bedrock, and then all the communications spin on top of that. So metrics is a very interesting measurement, and metrics is an interesting conversation, because as vital a tool as it is, and I will swear for that till the cows come home, it's one of the toughest to measure. The beauty of marketing today, which is largely digital, is its inherent measurability. So insofar as we can take the core of who we are, insofar as we can translate that into a potent visual identity system, a potent series of brand voice guides, and then take all of those core components and bring it to life. And it's not as easy or as simple as I just made it sound, where it's like we take our identity, we take our brand voice, and here is a campaign. Like there's a lot of love and a lot of care and concern that goes into it. But we want to deploy it seamlessly and holistically across our channels. We want to anticipate the consumer journey and figure out what they're going to see in what sequence, or if there's myriad sequences, how can they enter that conversation? How can they encounter our message in a way that will be inviting and not jarring, helpful and not superfluous, or just like we're talking at them? And then, the beauty of today's vehicles is the measurement. So, we will like A/B test, emails, or, we will measure engagements of social posts. And, as much as we're always moving forward and creating new, we try to pause and learn from what the data says and what's resonating with people. I think the risk is twofold. The risk is either an analysis paralysis. We're not a brand in that kind of shape, but I certainly, as a strategist in my prior life, encountered a lot of brands that are like, data, what do we do with it? And then there's the, you have data and you start avoiding the temptation to do things by numbers. Like just because like this kind of headline has more email opens, and this sort of flow through an email has more click-through rates. Like those are important data points, but that does not mean you then know how to do the most successful email. And that also, more importantly, doesn't mean that you aren't in need of continually evolving, not changing who you are or what you stand for, but thinking up the next way that you can come to life to keep things interesting. Like you don't want to data yourself into a rut. You don't want to data yourself into a formula. You want to learn and incorporate that, but you want to continue to inspire and delight in ways that our products do. So it's a high bar for us in marketing and brand, because the products have set a high bar.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, both brand and agency side. And you made a point which people who are unfamiliar with strategy, there's always that idea of like you're looking for that universal truth, as you said, uncovering a truth, whether it's in human behavior or emotion. And I think that really plays into the way OXO is doing research, at least on its products. it seems like there's a ton that goes into the design, a ton of thought that goes into the design of the products. I would love to hear about how you're using research. What's the research process like for OXO? Do you have a bunch of people in the room and
Gosh, it varies. Like on the marketing side, we've done a consumer segmentation, and we're able to hone in on various consumer mindsets and moments in their lives, and just their approach to curating their home. I mean, there's that kind of research, and we try to keep our ears open on that front. And then there's my colleagues on the product side who are wonderful product developers, but I think they could also probably have the title of ethnographer at this point.
Yeah.
Someone will go to Seattle for a conference back when people used to do things like that, when we traveled and there were conferences, and they would also like work with recruiters to find consumers and go to their house and ask them how they make coffee. I mean, it's like very impressive how grassroots the passion for research is, and the ability for our product developers to oftentimes be the actual moderators of those conversations. It's really quite scrappy for a brand that's been around for a while. We are quite nimble in how we do things. And then, we're global. Like we always want to learn about our other markets. Like, so it's a combination of like rigorous user testing when a product is in development. We use ourselves first. It's funny, when I first started, I overheard a conversation through a thin wall between conference rooms, and someone said, I won't name names, but I found this so endearing. They're like, we use ourselves first to test. We're literally guinea pigs. And I thought, okay, we're not literally guinea pigs. We're figuratively guinea pigs.
But what I do love about that is there is a level of self-awareness there, because you have to pay attention to what you're doing and how you're doing it. I love the story behind the development of the measuring cup, because that is a huge pet peeve of like having to pour it, step back, look down.
So it's interesting you say that, Jonathan, because I agree. I think the angled measuring cup is like a portfolio showstopper. And when you encounter it for the first time, that is a moment when people fall in love with the brand. What's interesting that you just said is like, in my mind, that's a great example of OXO solving a problem that consumers didn't know that they had. So it's like, I'm a baker, and like I would make pancakes and I would make cakes and cookies, and I never gave a second. I'm saying but this is true of a large population. Like, how many people say, oh gee, it's such a pain to do this. It's such a pain to like have to lift the cup up to make sure the liquid measurement's right, or to like turn my head into a yo-yo to make sure that that's flush on the counter and the measurement's right. I think the average human has been compensating for that for like literally centuries, and not saying that they wish that there was a solve. We just sort of automatically default into correcting a design flaw, which is that you had to use your body to make sure something was measured right. OXO's measuring cup folds in the material in a way that like you can see the measurements from above, as you know, and you get to maintain your posture. You get to maintain your integrity. You get to maintain your literal view of the world, so that you don't become this design compensation. But it's interesting you mentioned that. I agree completely that it's a great origin story. But it's interesting because I've found that that's something we anticipated needs that consumers were not aware of. And it's one thing to solve a known problem, which OXO is quite good at and proud of. But it's quite a different level to solve a problem that people didn't realize they were compensating for. And that's when people are like, oh, you guys are good. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I agree 100%. I think that's when the true creativity, or like, for me, when I think of creativity, I think of it as a tool for problem solving, or it's, that's more maybe from the agency experience, speaking,
but absolutely.
or design.
And the empathy that you were talking about earlier is like, you really have to care about people and care about how they live their lives. And, we talk about being like empathetic and insightful observers as an organization, and just kind of curious humans, like determined to do things better, determined to find a better way to make everyday life better. I mean, you have to kind of have that mindset to be able to bring your expertise to the table, but then to also shake yourself out of yourself and just watch human beings do daily tasks to identify opportunities to make things better, not just by solving the obvious problems, but solving problems people don't even realize they're problems. But once we solve them, the appreciation is there. It's funny, I got locked. This is like a 3-year-old story. Right after I started OXO, I had a call with China in like the middle of the night. It was like 11 o'clock at night. And long story short, my lock broke on my apartment. And suddenly I found myself locked in my apartment, which is a terrifying thing in the middle of the night. And so I called a locksmith and they drilled through the door. I happened to have an OXO like dustpan and brush. And so after he left, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm like cleaning up metal shards on my floor. I'd never used this dustpan before. And what I found totally unexpectedly is that the brush was angled just slightly so that my arm didn't have to angle. And let me tell you, at 2 o'clock in the morning, after being locked in an apartment in the middle of the night, I was like, oh man, these guys are so good. Like it was like an angled measuring cup level moment.
Get your own aha moments,
Yeah, and it was a small one, but it was under extreme circumstances. It's really something to think through all of those details. And even when you're on the inside, you find moments of appreciation for your colleagues. And so hopefully consumers do too.
You touched on scrappiness, and I love that you did, because so we come up with we as an agency, we developed like a 10-point like Bill of Rights or a manifesto. One of those is we're small and scrappy on purpose. So I would love to hear you talk about that, because OXO is not a small company. And we often hear about how large companies take forever to pivot, they are slow, and I have rarely heard a fairly sized company say that they're nimble and scrappy. So I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic because we are at a bit of a crossroads. So OXO was founded as a challenger brand in 1990. But that term did not yet exist. Like we were a disruptor, we were like nothing else, and a lot of the category that we came to dominate didn't even have branded competitors. So we not only introduced a new design paradigm, a new consumer goods paradigm, we introduced a brand that meant something into people's lives. And then, over the years spread out to other categories, notably, cleaning and organizing, coffee, et cetera, baby. And so a brand that does that becomes so successful, runs the risk of kind of abandoning its challenger roots and becoming like weighted under the bulk of its portfolio, or, just so big that like suddenly you're worried about making a move. OXO's been fortunate enough to, be welcomed into a lot of people's homes and a lot of people's lives over the years, but we're really conscious about our challenger roots. We actively talk about them, not in a self-conscious way, just in a way that's like humble and reminds ourselves of why we exist and reminds ourselves of how we have to stay open and we have to stay, as you said, nimble and scrappy as possible, and really harness that disruptor spirit and that challenger spirit, so that it isn't just like, our origin story. It's like so key to who we are, because we're disrupting things constantly. We're either first in a category and doing something no one's ever done, or we reinvent something in a way that's completely turning the paradigm upside down. So we have to do that just because of the business we're in and our approach to innovation. But it's not easy, because once you become a success, it's easy to become a success and then want to just grow and sort of maintain. But I think like we talk about how we have a restless search for better. It's like one of our brand pillars, and like it's a good restlessness. It's not like you can't sleep at night, or like, get back to work, get back to the salt mines. It's like, what can we do next? What can we do better? What can we make that will help people? It's genuine, and it is something that drives us, and it's something that comes to life the same but differently in various departments. And the cross-functional teams are really like wonderful partners to each other. And I think that varied perspective helps to enrich our culture and to make the ideas better as well. I don't just mean product ideas. I mean like how we come to life, how we, meet consumers, things along those lines. But it is, I will tell you that it's conscious and deliberate, and the brands that lose sight of that, that's when you cease to be who you were when you started. One of the other wonderful things about OXO is, and this is no accident, is a lot of people have been there their whole careers. I'm there 3.5 years, and it's a very welcoming place. I feel like I've been there a long time. But when I think of how long my colleagues have worked together, they were babies when they started, and now they are on their like third child, and they've moved to a suburb, or whatever life stage they're in, they've shared it together. And I mention that not just because it's the kind of place people want to stay and people genuinely like each other, but that they were there. A lot of people were there from the very beginning. Even a decade ago, we were, not where we are today. So it's great to have people who were there from the start and actually were living the true scrappiness, because they had no other choice. We are now scrappy by choice because we want to maintain the spirit of our origin.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I think when you hear of employees who have stuck around for years and years and years, it tells a story of a strong internal culture, and a strong internal community. What are some of the things that OXO is doing to help maintain and build that?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different, and it's a great question in general. It's a particularly interesting question these days in the year 2020 when we've been home since March. Thursday the 14th was the day that everything sort of came into focus for a lot of people, but that's OXO closed that day. I kind of like walked home 30 blocks and had my whole desk in my hands, and I've been in my dining room table ever since. And so how do you maintain that? And I think we're trying to figure that out. I mean,
I think we all are.
Yeah. Oh, I know. We're certainly not alone. But our space is much loved. And we have in our space, we call it the OXO glove wall. So it's one of those things, it's like almost 20 years old, although I think it's kept fresh, but it's like a large wall with like a grid of, hundreds of gloves, all different kinds of gloves, knit gloves, ski gloves, worker gloves, elegant leather gloves, rugged gloves. And we have them there to remind ourselves that we make tools for all kinds of hands, getting back to our origin story. And so in the office, that's like a really lovely touchstone. I was there a solid year before I could walk by it without almost getting choked up. It was like such a powerful thing. It's visually stunning as well. It almost feels like an art installation, but it's a nice reminder. So when we're in the office, we have that. We also have like really wonderful committees. Like we have like a culture committee, and we have like a social committee, and we have like a green committee that's like constantly digging through our garbage and like helping us understand how we can make more sensitive choices. We have a bowling crew, like there's like trips out of town twice a year. There's volunteer days together. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, but it doesn't feel like, and now you must volunteer and now you must attend this event. It really happens effortlessly, and it's always a pleasure. And if people can participate or not, but those things are there. They're really conscious parts of our culture. Another thing that's new in the last couple of years, but really powerful, is like a formal sense of appreciation. So every month we can email in, and we're reminded every month, like a coworker that you appreciate. And there's a couple of categories. There's like, who's the hero that we all need? Who's gone above and beyond? Who's, like a couple of different categories. And, it's just, you take that extra moment to say, I think so-and-so is really great for doing this. And people really do it. And I think that, and then a lot of people thank their teams, and a lot of people thank people from across the organization they happen to work with or just like on a project. And all of that goes a long way. There's individual moments that add up, and it really helps build the culture. Virtually, as you said, everyone's trying to come to terms with things. We're working on it. We had Zoom happy hours for a while, and then when we took a break from the Zoom happy hours for a while, and there's like smaller group get-togethers, team get-togethers. It'd be nice to create events that are like common interests coming together, and you might share things with people you didn't realize that you shared. So if we can create those opportunities, it's different ways for the organization to come together. I think what's missing, and this is going to sound so obvious, are those unplanned moments where you're like getting a cup of tea, or you bump into someone by the elevator, or you walk with someone to get lunch. I mean, those are, they feel so old-fashioned. And they'll be back again eventually. But until then, how do you create those moments of surprise, of delight, of grace? We give that a lot of thought to. I'll keep you.
Well, I think those moments of just those small interactions are also like really important for creativity and problem solving. You can spend all the time you want on a problem. When you get up, walk away, your mind subconsciously works on that. You have a conversation with someone, and it can spark and feed into that. And I'm curious to how just long term that's going to play into creative output
I mean,
And
it's a great question. We're just trying to do everything we used to do in person,
yeah,
virtually. It's interesting. Like, you don't have to commute to work anymore, for us, which is like very, very fortunate. But so you have more work time, but you're sitting in one place and you don't have to walk from room to room. And
yep,
even just like the getting up, I think even just from like a blood circulation standpoint,
yeah,
like you could open up a window, you could walk outside, you could have a totally unrelated conversation. And I'm with you. Those are the moments where you're subconsciously working out problems that if you focus on them too much, it's almost counterproductive. The answer is, I don't know. We're trying to
yeah,
do everything virtually the way we
same.
did live. I find that I'm a prodigious typer PowerPointer, but when I work out strategy problems, I go to Sharpie and like
Hmm.
pad the paper. And so I'm trying to book time to do that, to consciously turn off my computer, to go to a different room in my home and to sit down and actually like work out problems, be it like writing prose that way, or like a perceptual map, or to like distill learnings from secondary research or whatnot. So I definitely don't have a good answer. I can only tell you that we're trying to use technology to continue working together the way we always have. And then individually, I think there's the spirit of experimentation to find out through technology and on an unplugged level as well, how can we keep that alive? It's been
Hmm.
going pretty well so far, but there's no substitute for being together. And I think we all really miss each other.
So I love the green community you have going at the company, and it's part of a new initiative, or is it something that's been around for a while? But I know you recently joined 1% for the Planet.
Yeah.
Are those things tied together?
We've had a green committee for several years.
Okay.
Actually, one of our product developers, who's really a fantastic person, she comes from the Parks Department and the
Oh, cool.
recycling division, and it's just great to have her lead that. It's like we've all learned so much from it. There's like when we were in the office, there were like amazing diagrams of like I don't know every material you could think of, so just to make us more mindful. So that's been going on for a while. But we joined 1% for the Planet this year, which is really exciting. So we joined in March, but we're going to start our official campaign launch is right after Labor Day in September 2020. And this is our 30th. And we thought 2020 would be a great year of celebrating that. 2020 turned into a year that celebration is not like the first word you think of. So we're
Hmm.
marking it as a milestone, humbly. But
Hmm.
1% for the Planet is part of that. And that's not to say like, yay, our 30th, we're joining 1%. Goodbye. It's just the beginning. It's just the beginning of an exciting new chapter.
Hmm.
So yeah, our 1% for the Planet commitment began this year. We are donating 1% of our sales to environmental nonprofits. And this is a commitment we're really proud to make. We're donating funds, we're donating resources, we're donating our time. And just learning, I mean, I've known about 1% for the Planet for, it's been around, I think, 20 years, but didn't really learn about its intricacies until we started partnering with them. And I know I'm telling you something, as a 1% partner as well. But in addition to this commitment of giving back, it plays almost like a matchmaker with nonprofit organizations. So there's the partner brands on one end of 1% for the Planet, and then the partner nonprofits on the other end. And 1% becomes a conduit for introductions that then help us focus our funds and our resources and our energies on the right kind of partners for us. So we're giving this in general we're giving, but we have 3 giving buckets that we're
Hmm.
focusing on, and we looked to ourselves within ourselves. We looked within our portfolio. We're like, okay, what do we know best? What do people know us for? And we used our portfolio as inspiration for those 3 giving areas. The first is like sustainable food systems. So we're known
Hmm.
for our kitchen products, our cooking and baking tools, and we thought that would be a great conduit to something that supported more sustainable food systems. So that's one of
Hmm.
our 3 buckets. We have a robust cleaning portfolio. We make the tools, and we thought, well, that's a great jumping off point for organizations. Our second bucket, promoting cleaner air, land, and water. And then our
Hmm.
top end of the spectrum, which is baby and toddler, was the inspiration for environmental education, focusing on environmental education for like youth programs. And we thought, isn't it great that like younger generations are wonderfully hardwired to care about these efforts. And if we could support organizations that help enhance that and direct it to a really positive place, we'd be really proud of that. So we're giving 1% of our sales to 1% for the planet, which is then a conduit to giving to organizations within those 3 buckets. And we're currently in the process of selecting partner organizations.
Oh, that's amazing. I love how you've tied the pillars into the sort of product categories. And I think that makes complete sense. And something
we definitely wanted to anchor it in something. We care about this cause in general, but we wanted it to come from what we know best and what we could help make a difference in.
Yeah. I mentioned this earlier and on previous podcasts, but brand values is just something that I have fallen in love with, that concept of how you can really build a foundation for a business off of. It can become your North Star during difficult times, and your North Star when you're growing and you're trying to expand and you're riding the wave. It still can help keep you grounded and focused. I'm curious to how this plays into the OXO brand values as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have a really defined brand strategy. As a strategist, when I joined the organization, that became like, surgeons always want to operate. That's the answer in the surgeon's mind. As a brand strategist, when I got there, I'm like, okay, this place needs a brand strategy. And it was a wonderful exercise because there's so much great stuff to work with. You're not, in this case, is not about changing the organization. It's about capturing what made it special. And, because, you can launch a brand from scratch. There's no precedent. You could have a mandate for change, evolution, revolution, transformation. But when you're crystallizing a brand, as a strategist in my prior life, that's the challenge I always loved the most, because it was the biggest challenge. Because if you don't get it right, there's like a room full of people, an organization full of people who are going to be like, no, that's not us. So the ethos of OXO was like very apparent within the organization, but it had never really been articulated. So a couple of years ago, one of the first things that we tackled as kind of an enhanced brand and marketing part of the organization was to define what OXO stood for. And that's what we were saying earlier. Our essence is make every day better every day. That is our internal rallying cry. And the beauty of that is it by design, it applies to everything we do. I mean, everyone thinks of our products first, but that's like, you could apply making everyday campaigns better, everyday, customer relationships better. So hopefully everyone in the organization is heading toward that North Star, which is very important in a time of crisis, but is actually important when things are great too, just as inspiration. If it's done right, it will be ongoing inspiration for many years. And so as we approach this milestone, our 30th, it was like, well, what's our next chapter? We want to keep doing everything we're doing right, but we want to give back. So I like the inspiration story for 1% for the planet. Our brand president, Larry Witt, he also runs our sister brand, Hydro Flask, which is a much loved brand as well.
Yeah, it's a great product.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a wonderful brand. Proud to be related to it as well. And so he was at Outdoor Retailer, so a trade show that Hydro Flask participates in, and he was really struck with the presence of 1% for the planet and the predominance in that industry of organizations, brands determined to give back in lots of different ways. And he called me actually from the floor of Outdoor Retailer. I was on vacation, and I was on Cape Cod, which is like my favorite place, and I was 2 miles out at low tide. It was actually quite amazing. I got cell service and my phone rang, and it was my boss, and I foolishly answered the phone, and he was so excited. I'm glad I answered the phone. And he was like so excited. He had this great idea that he wanted OXO to participate in 1% for the planet as well. So it became this whole conversation, and it was like kind of strangely fitting to have it, in the middle of one of the most beautiful expanses of nature that I can think of. And then, when he got back from his trip and I got back and everyone was back in the office, it was off to the races, like both hammering out the details of our commitment to 1% for the planet, and then starting to think about how to bring it to life. Which we're going to start through our communication, in September 2020. But I think it fits beautifully with our ethos. I mean, the inspiration point was like, wow, this outdoor industry is so enlightened. How can we bring some of that to our world, to the world of housewares? The outdoor industry, I mean, look at the name. It is outdoors. It's about living life in nature. We're definitely like thrilled if someone takes us out of the house, but we're perfectly proud to live in drawers and cabinets too. And so how can we make people conscious of choices that they're making every day? When we think about our core, our essence, we make every day better every day. How can you like, that pushes us to make choices just like this one. By donating money, we're helping to make every day better on the planet. And when we think about the connection between OXO and 1% for the planet, we make products, we have for 30 years, we will for indefinitely more. We make products for the home. And now in our 30th year, in addition to that, we wanted to turn our attention to the home that we all share, the planet. So that's how we framed the connection between homes that we live in as a brand, as products, and looking outside, outdoors, how can we give back to that as well? So it very much fits nicely with our ethos of better. We wanted people to make choices about everyday products that would give back. We want people to make choices in how they live their lives that will be better as well. And as an organization, this is just the beginning of our journey, a long time commitment that we're happy to make, is how do we look within and start to make choices that will make us better as a brand and a business as well.
And I'm gonna, as we wrap here, I'm gonna ask one question. It's a little bit more personal.
Sure.
And I read a bit about you going into this interview and learned that you are a big fan, or you have heroes that are Nancy Drew and Carl Sagan, and I really love that. And I love how these outside interests and these little things can get pulled into our work and sort of, lead and are representations of bigger ideas and bigger things, speaking as a strategist. And I would love to hear, why they're your heroes and what you take from them and put into your own work.
That's very funny. And yeah, it's totally true. So I actually think Nancy Drew and Carl Sagan have a lot in common in that they're both, obviously one is fiction and one is a brilliant, real person, human mind. I went to Cornell where Carl Sagan taught, and I was fortunate to be in his presence several times, hearing him speak. And it was among the most amazing, moments and privileges of my life. I've always been a fan of Carl Sagan, even growing up. Actually, even before I was a fan of Nancy Drew, I didn't read Nancy Drew when I was really little. I had some books on my nightstand that I was kind of a fraidy cat kid of scary stories. So I just would look at the covers and be like, I don't think I'm ready for this. And then, I discovered them when I was a little bit older. And now I find when I'm super stressed, I have a collection. It's on my desk. I just think the iconic yellow spines are so beautiful. When I'm super stressed or super stuck on a problem, I'll pick one up. And I say that knowing that they are intended for 10-year-olds, but I swear she is a modern, fabulous woman. They're written in the 30s, and there's just a lot of pluck and a lot of grit. I think what those two very unlikely character combos have is that they both have a sense of curiosity, a sense of wonder, a sense of awe at what's around them. I really shouldn't put the two of them in the same sentence, but I find they are both my inspiration and in many ways my heroes. I feel like Nancy Drew was just, as a character, so ahead of her time, inspired generations and generations of women. Also super stylish and sleek, driving around in her convertible, totally fearless. She found herself in total pickles all the time and got out of them with elegance and grace. So I just think she's one of these great characters. I remember when I think it was Sandra Sotomayor, when she was entering the Supreme Court, she cited that as one of her heroes, and I was so excited. Everyone I knew called me and was did you hear that? So I'm glad to know she's inspiring far more accomplished people than me. But yeah, I think she remains just plucky and adventurous and fearless. So that's what I take from her. Carl Sagan is, nonpareil, can't put anyone else in that category. But, growing up and watching Cosmos and watching it repeatedly as an adult and, watching his, knowledge base expand in the way he was so brilliant at distilling information and sharing it. There's a bunch of brilliant scientists and I am in awe of all of them, but it takes a really unique left brain, right brain situation to be able to distill it and communicate it out and make it tangible, and also couple it with this sense of awe and wonder. And I also love, because I went to Cornell, which is, in the Finger Lakes, upstate New York, in Ithaca, which is such a special place. Not in a nostalgic college way, empirically, one of the most stunning natural landscapes ever. And, the geology is unique and the gorges are just like mind blowing. They're like cathedrals. And I love the idea that Carl Sagan studied and explained the cosmos and Voyager, like sent things into the outer reaches beyond the solar system. But he chose, of all the places on planet Earth, to be in Ithaca and to be at Cornell. Mm-hmm. And he died so young. Actually, right after I graduated, he died. And actually just last year, I go up to lecture on branding at Cornell every year. Sometimes students come to me in town. I prefer it when I get to go up and lecture on campus even more. And when I did that just a year ago, I'm doing it virtually in a couple weeks. When I did that a year ago, I actually stopped by, not to sound whatever, but stopped by the cemetery. He's buried at one of the most stunning cemeteries anywhere, with this beautiful view of the valley and the lake. And it's just, I don't know, I find it very poignant, not just because I'm a big fan of his, but I just think that sense of awe and wonder coupled with the fragility and tangibility of human life and his massive contribution in a relatively brief number of years is just very humbling and very inspiring. And I love brand strategy, but it's certainly nothing compared to, working at NASA JPL and explaining the cosmos to, humankind. But as much as you can take inspiration from a giant like that and use it as something that's like in your heart that fuels you personally and professionally, I feel really lucky.
Well, I think there's crossover there between strategy and the work that Carl Sagan did, just in that they're looking for a truth, right? They're looking for a universal truth. They're sifting through lots of ideas, lots of information, and really trying to like distill it down to something that's understandable to a lot of people. There's so many like great minds that, if you talk to them, they may not have the ability or skill set to communicate that in a way for a larger audience to understand. So I think there's a real crossover there, truthfully.
I absolutely agree. And I think the other thing as a strategist and especially as a strategy consultant, like when you're in there and you have an expertise and you've done this before, but the inspiration, the input is always new and the output is always unique, but you do have fresh eyes. And I find that, sometimes, this is a big statement, and I'm going to take it down to brand strategy, which is not a big world, but like, the answers, the secrets are hidden in plain sight. It's things people can't see. Not in an obvious, like, we'll look at that way, but more like revealing something that's been there all along but has never been noticed, or making connections between things you can see, and that connection makes it fresh or new or unexpected. And I think that's the most exciting moment. And to your point earlier, you never quite know when it's going to hit. You can't force yourself to define a brand the way you can force yourself to do a spreadsheet, crunch numbers, do something operational. Like, those are vital things. But like when it's something, it's part art, part science, way more art than science. And you never know what's going to strike you. You never know what's going to catch your interest. You never know in a totally different part of your life that's going to trigger something that will come into play years later in ways you never expected. Art history has always been a passion of mine. And the number of times that I've used artists or individual pieces of art as a touchstone unexpectedly are more times than I can count. And just as a way to organize your thoughts. So yes, there's definitely connections into how we think and how we process and how we creatively ideate. Absolutely.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for joining us. I found it's a great conversation.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you,
I learned a lot. Yeah, so thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today and listening to our conversation with Karen. I think the big takeaway for me was learning about using empathy in product development and marketing. And it's a subject I will probably continue to research and dive into. Please rate and share. As always, you can email us at hi@weareunconquered.co with any comments or suggestions. Thanks.